It's time for the outer borders on our Hoppin' Down the Bunny Trail bench pillow. For the outer borders, I have all of the fabric cut and backed with fusible interfacing, and I wanted to make a note. There are several sets that are both pieces because we have a top and a bottom border. And several of these sets are cut to exactly the same size. And 4 of the sets, you notice, have one that is longer. And that is for the ends of the borders. And so it shows, for example, this blue and this brown will be to the left side, and the green and the gray will be on the right sides end of the border. You could change those around, but those longer pieces they want at the end, they will be trimmed a little bit equal on both sides, but that's the reason that there are 4 sets that have 2 different sizes. So let's start on these borders. So I'm about ready to sew these border pieces together. I have them laid out in the same order as the book. However, you can choose to do any order that you want. The only thing you need to pay attention to is these 4 on the ends need to be on the ends. You can put them on any end, but the longer strips need to be on the ends. Now, the one change I am going to make is I am going to cut these down just a little bit. The directions for the border say that if you're doing the block by block quilting, which is what I'm doing, and that's what we've done this whole quilt, they had us cut fabric to 4 inches tall. And when I do borders, I find that it's easier for placing because we're going to be doing multiple hoopings to hoop or to quilt this entire strip. It's easier to line up when these are the size that they need to finish at, which is 3.5 inches. So I am going to take the 4-inch strip, these are all 4 inches tall, and I am going to cut them down to 3.5 inches. I will be using the placement line of the fabric, which is something that I normally don't do when I do the background quilting. But again, that is something I do for borders because it helps placement of the multiple hoopings that we have to do. So before I start sewing these together, I am going to cut all these down. When I sew these together, I will just chain stitch pairs and then put those pairs together and make one long strip for the top and one for the bottom, and then we can start quilting. I need to bring in the files for the outer border. You can use the merge stitch file icon, but an easier way is to open the folder where you keep your files. I will open the quilting bundle and Easter 2, and our outer border files are 3 inches, and I will still be using my 9x14 inch hoop, so I will drag and drop the 3x14 inch design. I will be quilting both strips in my 9x14 inch hoop. However, before I make the second copy, there are some changes I need to make to the background quilting. These are the same steps as the block background quilting. The first step is the placement of the batting. The second is the tack down of the batting. The third is the placement of the fabric. The fourth is the tack down of the fabric, and then the quilting. Now, normally through this project, I have been deleting the tack down of the batting as well as the placement for the fabric when I have done the blocks. However, the only step that I'm going to delete is going to be the tack down of the batting. I will select that and hit delete. The reason I am keeping the placement for the fabric this time is that I have my strips cut exactly to 3.5 inches wide, and that is the placement line. And this will help when I'm trying to do the multiple hoopings to quilt this entire strip. This placement line will help me keep those straight. So I am going to keep that. Now I am going to color sort this first file, and that is because I can run both the placement for the batting and the placement for the fabric at the same time. So I am going to come up to Utility and Color Sort. Always select a new view. So now when I open up the file on the right hand side, I have just 3 steps instead of 4. I have both of the placement for the batting and the fabric running at the same time, and then I have the tack down of the fabric and the quilting. So now that I have that set, I can go ahead and select this file. I am on a Mac, so I am going to Command C to copy and Command V to paste, and that gives me a second file. I am going to use my arrow key and just move it over. You can also right click and copy and paste. Now, of course, these still overlap, and so I am going to select the first one and move it to the left. And they don't need to be this far apart because remember our fabric is exactly to where this blue line will be. But it really doesn't matter where I place them. I have the whole 9-inch width and I have just the 2 designs. So now I have the 2 designs, and if I go to the Stitch Simulator, you can see by the colors repeating that this, as of now, will run 1 strip completely start to finish before starting the second. And that's not exactly what I want because I'm using software. I need to color sort again. So I will come to Utility and Color Sort. It's been changed by 3 color changes or 3 stops, and always hit a new view. So now I have 1 file with 3 steps. So the first step will put the placement of the batting and the fabric for both of the strips. The second will do both tack downs, and then the quilting will be both done at the same time, and that's exactly what I need. So now I can come to File, Save Stitch File As, and I'm going to name my design. I will put it into my Combined Files folder, and then I will add it to my USB so I can take to my machine. Again, you can also go to Utility and Wi-Fi. If you have a machine that can send directly, you can change the name or keep it as the default and then send it right to your machine. Let's go start on these outer borders. So I will go to Embroidery and to my USB and to my Combined Files folder, and I will bring in the outer borders and hit Set and Embroidery, and I don't need to move them because they're taking up the whole hoop. And I will go to the minus plus needle just in case I need it, And I do want to show that I am going back to muslin for the outer borders. So let's get this first placement line stitched out. So I have my placement lines for both the batting and the fabric stitched in a dark brown so that I can see them. Here are all of my borders pieced together. I have the seams pressed open, and remember the longer pieces are on each end, and I did cut them down, so now you can see they fit exactly with those placement lines. So for my batting, I have 3-inch wide cut. And so I am going to lightly spray these just a little bit. And I'm just looking, here's the end, so I'll just stop about right there. I use the Warm and Natural for the most part. And I'm not sure I've ever mentioned this before, but Warm and Natural kind of has a side that has little speckles on it. And then the other side is just doesn't have those. So I always spray the side that has that those specks in it so that it will go down towards the stabilizer, and the part that doesn't have that will face the background fabric. Especially if you have a light background fabric, these might, shadow through. So I always make sure that this will be down towards the stabilizer. So now I will just take, and as we did with the inner border, I'm going to line up with the top of that placement. And it looks like I'm actually a little bit wide on this batting. I think I'm going to go, even though I've sprayed it, I am going to go take it and trim it up so it's a little bit more precise. I did cut these in a double layer. Usually when I cut in a double layer, I will put it out to a single layer and double check. This one is perfect. All right, so I will get this trimmed up, and then I will place both, and then we'll be ready to place the fabric. So I am going to place my fabric just like they have in the sample. Of course, you can do these any way you want. You don't have to do them in the exact same order, but I am going to. So this will be for the left side of the pillow. I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to spray the back, and then I will put a little bit of this fabric, about 1/4 of an inch off the edge. A little bit on both ends will be cut off, and then I will just place it along this placement. And one of the most important things is to make sure that when you're placing this down, that the seams remain open and don't get folded under. I think that would be better for the quilting. So let's get these placed. So here is a quilting. It is so cute. I just love every border quilting that Kimberbell has done. Now it is, I do have to say, hard to see on this brown. I used the flint color, which is my new favorite color, but look how cute. So we've got the bunnies. This looks like a bunny on the swing with his little fringe tail. We've got a little sign like our bunny trail. And another little bunny from the front, and then all the flowers. I love it. Love it, love it. Okay, so now I am going to remove this from the hoop and trim loosely the muslin and get ready for the next hooping. So it says I'm finished embroidering, so I will select OK. And now I'm just going to run it again. So let's do the second hooping. So I've got my next set of placement lines ready to go. And when I cut the stabilizer, which again I'm using muslin, I just loosely cut it around except for where I ended the quilting. And I am just going to fold that back. Of course I will spray it, but I will line this folded edge up with this placement, making sure that my batting is even with the inside line, my fabric with the outside line as best as possible, and then I will fold them both down and tape like I did before. And we'll go run the second hooping. So here's the second hooping, and you might have noticed I forgot to change my dark brown thread out for the tack down. That doesn't matter. I take that out anyways. So now I'm ready to just repeat this process. I will take this out, trim loosely, cut this edge nice, and then our last little piece to hoop is not quite as long as the hoop, and so it will just go, you know, onto the stabilizer. We'll finish the last hooping for our outer border. So I have the last bit hooped up, and you can see that my border material does not go to the end of the actual background quilting, and that's fine. I did tape along this edge so that when it was quilting and if it came back up this way, it wouldn't accidentally catch the bottom of the fabric and mess it up. So I did tape across both of those. I will let the border stitch completely out, and this will just be cut off. So let's go finish up our last hooping. So I have the last hooping done, and let me take it out and show you what this looks like. So you can see that the extra background quilting just went onto the stabilizer. I can pull this out. Of course, there's stitching over it, but I'll get that taken out, and then let's get this trimmed up. So I am going to take out one edge of the basting stitches, and I'm going to leave one edge in. So this is the top of the pillow and this is the bottom. So for the top piece, I am going to leave in this basting stitch because the binding will be attached to this, and it'll just be nice to have that together. And then I will leave the stabilizer in that whole seam. I'll just cut the stabilizer right next to the fabric. And then this edge I will take out, and this will be sewn to, of course, the inner border on the top. And I will do the opposite on this. This is the bottom border. This top will come out, this basting, and I will stitch this to the inner border. And then the bottom basting I will leave on and just trim my stabilizer, and it will be ready for the binding, and that way it'll just give a little extra stability for the binding. So let me get the stabilizer cut, and we can get to stitching this on the quilt. So here I have the stabilizer all trimmed up, and so the bottom row again has the bottom edge. I just left the basting in, and so the stabilizer just goes right to the edge. You can see that. And then on the opposite side that will be sewn to the inner border, I have cut that out of the seam allowance. And same thing here, but opposite. So the top is still has the stabilizer and the basting. The bottom that will be sewed to the inner border has the stabilizer cut out of the seam allowance. Let's go get these stitched on. So to put the top or outer border on, I am just going to fold it in half and mark the center with a pin. Because when we trim the outside edges, we want equal amounts taken off these longer pieces. We don't want to just start at the left and then have a super long piece, and then on the other end have a tiny little piece. So I will fold this in half and mark, and then sew, and then do the same thing with the bottom. I will fold the border in half, mark it, match it to the halfway mark, and then sew. So you can see that this is the end, and about, a little less than an inch overhangs from that longer piece, and about the same amount on the other end. And the reason they just didn't do it exactly is because you may not sew exact, and if these were cut and they were just a little bit too short, that would that would not be good. So they had these longer end pieces to make sure that you cut it to the length that your pillow ends up being. All right, so I'm going to go get this stitched on, and then I will do exactly the same thing on the bottom. I will fold this in half, mark it, start from the center and work my way out and get this sewed on. Also, I wanted to mention that probably an easier way to measure the middle of the pillow is to just measure half of this center block. The mushroom house is the center block, and so it should be 6 inches wide, which it is. And so I just need to mark and start to pin this border at the 3-inch mark. That's probably a lot easier and faster than folding this in half. So I just got done pressing my seams, and I pressed both the block portion seam and the outer borders towards the inner border. That's how mine laid the best, and so that's how I pressed mine. Now I'm just going to square up the ends with the borders. And so what I've done is I have just a 12-inch ruler, and I have just put some of the markings on my ruler. You can see I have perfectly lined up with the inner border. It lines up down with my basting at the bottom, or actually it's part of the quilting. And it lines up with this line of the top border. And I'm a hair shy in this top corner of the tree, and I have a little tiny bit to take off, so I will just square this up. And then I will just bring this down and do the same thing with the top. So I have the markings again lined up with the inner border, and that lines up evenly at the top. And I'm ready to trim off this top piece. And now I will do the same to the other side.